I will take you and aback a little bit.
Okay.
I wrote an intro.
That wasn't a bit. It was a gag, literally, but
I know. It's been a while, right?
been a minute. It's been a minute.
I figured we probably today could need an introduction to what the hell we're doing it more so than anything else, and I wanted to get my thoughts in order. Just because how often do I don't know what I'm here for.
I think you've described all three of us and the listeners for
That's probably true.
But yeah, by all means, my friend, the floor is yours.
Oh, all right. Well, let me try this, and there might even be a place for there. No, I take that back. Before I try this, just do the thing with the stuff and the music and the show. I said I wrote an intro. I didn't say it was going to be good or well put together.
And I hoped that it wouldn't be, because if it was, then it would be very off-brand.
If it was, it wouldn't be the Fairly KickAss podcast. I wouldn't be Dan, and you wouldn't be Zach, and we wouldn't be talking about, well, music, yes. But today, I think we try to embark on a new journey for this humble little show, for what it is, as we attempt to speak for generations of music fans, either righting past wrongs or confirming the assumptions and opinions. When we ask in this new segment, topic, I don't think we ever actually do we decide to what we're going to call our gimmicks? Is this?
I think I've always called them episodes, but I always hated that too. Yeah.
I don't know. But anyway, on to our new gimmick. Were we too hard on? We might want to workshop the name a little bit if we do this one again.
I mean, 8 out of 10. There's room for improvement, but.
I was assuming that we could catch on because I said hard on, and we'll say hard on quite a bit over the next however long this takes.
For fuck's sake.
But the idea here is exactly what it sounds like. And I figured we could start this podcast experiment with a classic. And we're not going to be the first one to market with this one at all. But an album that is so divisive among fans of a legendary band that they either completely changed the way that they looked at that band's music or felt so compelled to defend their album from the haters that a weekly Reddit post was created to examine its positive qualities. No joke on that one. But love it or hate it, people talked about in 2003 in ways that they really never talked about Metallica. So today on the Fairly KickAss podcast, we ask, were we too hard on Saint Anger? And it's a record that even the critics were really split on. Our friends over at Dick Shorts called it an utter mess and gave it a 0.0. The Village Voice had this to say when they said, quote, songs like Frantic, Dirty Window, and even the ballad-esque Sweet Amber stop and start, cut to pieces by groove-robbing edits that replace the guitar harmonies on which Metallica built an industry. But to be fair, on the flip side, Spin said that Saint Anger was the album Metallica lifers have been waiting for, an inspired return to the complex savagery of old. In Entertainment Weekly, the premier outlet when it comes to metal music, called it the season's finest metal offering and the band's best since 1991's Metallica. I feel like Entertainment Weekly started fistfights with that sentence.
I would be right there on the front lines.
So my first question, because I'm assuming that you did the same thing I did and went back and re-listened to the album for this show.
Yep.
But I guess I wanted to get a sense of where you fell on the criticism spectrum before going back for this episode.
I feel with Saint Anger that a lot of my anger, for lack of a better term, has been shaped by that very negative public outcry, that very public opinion about the album. Like, it's really hard, like you said, to find something good that someone said about this album, whether it be just in conversations or in media, on the internet, etc. And I wanted to make sure that I was going into this wiping that slate clean and removing any of my preconceived notions, which admittedly were A, very negative, and B, very centered around 2 tracks, which we'll get into shortly. And I wanted to give it a fair shake. So I feel like I was able to do that.
I hoped I was able to as well. Like I think I approached it the same way too, and I came at it from a different angle. So I wrote a 1 paragraph review and then went back and listened to it. That was completely from memory, and then went back and listened to it. So what I wrote, and I know it's always hacky just to read a script, but bear with us here. We're working on a process. This album was a disappointment for me. The lack of guitar solos made the songs excruciatingly long, and I was one who came to the band partially for that solos. The songwriting was, well, they had their moments on past records, but here didn't even reach meh for me. It felt rushed. It felt like it was either not thought out at all. There was so much thought put into every tiny minutia that the whole was completely disregarded. And then a year later, Some Kind of Monster came out, and in my brain, it's really hard to separate the band of the moment from the band on the record because of what they revealed about themselves in that documentary. It turns out they were as sloppy as the record they put out. And I will add that thankfully they all recovered and rebounded, hopefully healed in that process, and have made much better records. So that's where I knew coming in, just from the experience of that album coming out, bloody hell, 21 years ago.
Mm.
So now sit down and listen to Saint Anger, and I guess at that point I got to start. How would you best want to go through this record? Should we just go song by song and give some thoughts on the way through?
I think that's honestly the best way to do it. And I also appreciate you bringing up the reasoning and the themes and, the very, very, let's call a spade, very addiction heavy motifs around most, if not all, of this album. It was very hard to separate that out for me as well, knowing today in 2024, knowing what, the band went through in that respect. But I think it was an important exercise to kind of decouple that side of it with the music, the actual true musical side of things.
Yeah. And again, that's been very difficult. Not going to lie. Sure. And I feel like maybe some people didn't want to necessarily go in as hard on the album once they found out where all the writing was coming from. Right. And it's all coming from a place of James Hetfield trying to deal with a lot of stuff. It's essentially a public therapy session for him when you dig through these lyrics. And that's not an easy thing to critique someone both trying to work through their stuff in the mode of their art. And it's really hard when that art is not well received or received as being bad.
For sure. Yeah. All the credit to James for going through that process, for going through what he went through, and for coming out the other side of it. And granted, I don't know necessarily where on that other side he is, but I have to hope and believe that he is in a better place than he was back 21 years ago. So all kudos to him. Yeah, absolutely.
But that being said, we do have to look at the music.
That we do.
So right from the top, the kick off the album with the opener, Frantic. Boy, does it live up to its name.
I started with the joke, and I'm going to tell you that joke just real quick, because I have it in my notes here. So a family's dog comes into their house, having been outside all day long. The dog is covered by dirt and bugs and just all kinds of grossness. The dog's parent takes one look at him and says, "What the hell were you doing? It looks like you have 70 ticks on you." The dog says, "I fucked up the joke. That wasn't part of the joke. I actually fucked up the joke." I'm not going to run that back because we don't do that here. But the joke was supposed to be 60 ticks, not 70. To which the dog would reply, "60 ticks? What am I, Frantic by Metallica?" Because that's how many times that fucker says that word in that song. And I understand the reason. I understand the tonality of it. I understand that it's kind of its own sort of metronomic instrument, but I still don't like it. I don't like it at all.
Well, and again, it's right there. That's if you're building the aura and trying to give it's frantic. So the song was trying to put you off and give you a sense of panic. But it didn't need those lyrics to do it. There was the music itself does build that. The problem is it feels like there's a piece of the puzzle missing to truly kind of not just make it a piece to make it it's like a soundtrack piece that's supposed to set a tone. But this is a Metallica record. They're not soundtracking a horror movie. And I know I'm going to say this a lot, but what would have made this an effective thing, an effective piece? Guitar solo.
Facts.
Especially since it took 5 minutes and 50 seconds to get through this.
A refrain that you will come to know, listeners, because there's not a track on this album that's less than 5 minutes.
0. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Also true. Yeah. 5:13 is the shortest track that you get, and we will get to that.
Oof, will we ever?
Yep. So we go from the literal frantic start of the album to which was the second single, to the first single, the first taste of Saint Anger we got, which was the title track. There was the music video. There's everything accompanied to this. This was supposed to be the announcement, the first Metallica record in 6 years at that point. And it's probably the most complete track on the album, and it's probably got like the best lyrical work. There's an idea, there's a concept here that's being paid off, and the problem is that like there's a very easy joke to explain this whole thing, but a lot of other people have already made it. So like, yeah, it's about dealing with anger. Surprise, surprise.
Very true.
Like, sure, it's an angry song, and Metallica is known for angry songs. And then, like, it keeps going. And then there's a bridge, like, I don't know, 5 minutes in. And a normal Metallica song would just kind of let Kirk Hammett go, all right, well, do your wheedly wheedly woos, and you do you, man. And they didn't.
Go up to him now and say, hey, do your wheedly wheedly woos for me.
Can't you see? I mean, are you telling me you can't see Bob Rock in the studio just looking at Kurt and go, hey, wheedly wheedly woo, man, get in there?
Since you mentioned him, I do have to say that if you look at the Wikipedia page of Metallica's like membership list throughout the years, Bob Rock is not on it, despite the fact that he was the bassist throughout this album, kind of in between Jason Newsted's departure shortly before the recording and Robert Trujillo's entrance right towards the tail end of the recording. Yeah. That's all Bob Rock's work, and he gets no credit for it at all.
Well, and that's the thing. If you think about it, Bob Rock kind of is their, I don't know if using the comparison to him being their Billy Preston is quite there, but like Bob Rock is the guy that, for better or worse, made Metallica into the mainstream monster that we know. Like Metallica were already legendary in the metal scene before they started working with him. And then they were just through all of rock.
Yeah, and just a bit for the listeners who aren't familiar, Bob Rock, the producer for Metallica, the only producer, I believe, in their discography from the Black Album in 91 up through Saint Anger. So that covers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 different or 6 albums, and then Symphony of Metallica as well. So a huge figure in the pantheon of the band, but not as a musician, except for this one weird instance.
Is he credited on the album? I don't know that you mentioned it. Okay, so at least credited on the album.
Yeah.
For bass.
Yeah, the band credits him. It's just the Wikipedia article for Metallica as a band, like lists Jason Newsted, of course, lists Robert Trujillo, lists Cliff Burton, R.I.P., but does not list Bob Rock as a musician. They list him as a session or touring musician, which I guess is kind of true, but like, give the guy some credit. He's been there for like several albums.
Yeah, that's a little rough.
Yeah.
Although nothing for, do they have the? Nope, nothing for the guy that took over on tour for James Hetfield after he blew up.
Oh yeah, yeah. I guess that would be as touring musician as it gets. But
right, come on, Metallica or Wikipedia. Thing, this is not the band's fault. This is whoever wrote their page. Anyway,
for sure.
That tells you that we'd kind of rather talk about shit like this than the album. But either way, to go back to that bridge on Saint Anger, it was a perfect place for a guitar solo. We instead just get a drum breakdown, and we go right back into a verse, which extended the song for no good reason. And I think we'll point this out over and over again, is it's an album of missed opportunities because, I don't know, if you'd listen to the track a couple more times, maybe somebody could have said, hey, why don't we either not do that and play it out, or put something else in.
Both great options versus option C, which is what they went with.
Again, I think that's going to come up over and over again. Great options, except beside what they did do.
Yeah, yeah.
Next up, the namesake of the documentary that followed this, it's Some Kind of Monster, and honestly was not released as a single until the movie came out more than a year after the album's release. And my first thought was, hey, if you cut this thing down to 5 minutes, you got a great single, probably the best record song on the record. And instead, James Hetfield just wrote a pretty good riff, and then I apparently just fell in love with it and was like, I need 8.5 minutes of this riff. Go.
Bro, it takes 2 minutes and 7 seconds before you hear a single word song on Some Kind of Monster. That is Some Kind of Monster, is what that is. That's a fucking problem. Like, I totally agree. You almost plucked that directly from my notes that, like, if this song was half as long, was 4 minutes and change instead of 8 minutes and change, it's probably the best song on the album. It's probably just a objectively good song at that point. But it just did not need to drag out as long as it did.
No. And it's weird because, well, again, not that, like, Metallica isn't known for being able to put songs together with long intros. That's not a problem. Think of half of Injustice for All.
Yeah. Shout out to Live Is to Die specifically.
Oh my God, yeah. But there's everything else that followed the long intro. That was the difference.
Yeah, because it wasn't a long intro and then a reasonably sized song. It was a long intro and then 6+ more minutes of song.
And again, it wasn't like Master of Puppets is a long-ish intro, but also multiple definable parts of the song.
Right.
And I'm just going from memory, but I think we are past the 4-minute mark before we hear the title of the song, which is, again, that sounds very like, oh, it's just, you're thinking like a pop writer. But like that phrase, Some Kind of Monster, is like the hook and the most recognizable bit of this, to me, not just the song, but like the album. Like those 3 seconds, I'm like, oh, that would be like, if you caught that, there's your, I don't know, your booster, but it takes forever to get to, and then it just nothing happens with it.
And you actually, I didn't think about it in that sense until you just mentioned it. Like, in my head, if you look at like Master of Puppets versus Some Kind of Monster, I would say Some Kind of Monster is way longer, like several minutes longer. At least that's how it feels. In reality, and I had to look this up to be sure, it's only about 10 seconds shorter, not even longer, but shorter than Master of Puppets is.
Oh my God. And yet you don't realize that Master of Puppets is an 8-minute song because you get taken on a ride and it doesn't matter. And Some Kind of Monster drags you along the way.
Yeah, just totally different vibe, totally different. I want to say quality. Maybe that's unfair to say, but a totally different song composition.
Put a pin in that thought and just tack the word quality to the wall right next to you, and then be ready to pull that down in a few minutes. Track number 4 takes us to Dirty Window, and I will straight read what I wrote after listening to the song. I literally can't think of anything to write for this track. It's fast, but it still feels like it drags on so long. That's it. That's all I had.
I think I had the fewest notes as well for Dirty Window than any other song, but they were weirdly positive. I said it was a song with a modicum of personality and character, with some slight tempo changes and some fun vocal deliveries from Hetfield helping to boost it a bit. And it was comparative. Like it's there. We're talking about relativity here.
Yeah, right.
We're not talking about Saint Anger songs versus metal as a whole. Like there's no point in having that argument, right? But in terms of the album, this was, I thought, one of the better tracks on it.
Okay. I mean, I the reason I only hesitate to add anything positive to that is that Dirty Window kind of starts a run for the middle of the album, because it's legitimately, aside from the next track, Invisible Kid, I can't tell where a song starts or ends and the next one starts.
They do tend to run together. a lot. And I think maybe a part of that, and maybe this is the time that neither of us really wanted to take where we talk about the snare drum.
Um, well, yeah, that's a part of it. I think that's a major part of it, and that's the first place I mean, you and read anything about Saint Anger and anything, everyone talks about what the hell is up with the snare drum, and it sounds like he's just banging on a trash can, and they did, and it was a choice that was made. And it was a choice that they were just looking to kind of, I guess Lars wanted more ring out of his snare. And instead what he got was beer keg. And I don't know how else, like, but no one stepped up and said, it's ringing too much.
Right.
Nobody
friends,
went back and listened to it and went, this does not sound right for what we're doing. And of course, I guess I read a bunch of reviews for this, and they said the sound itself is not bad in the proper application. You hear a very similar, like, ringy drum sound for things like industrial. But one thing Metallica is not industrial. They are many things within rock, but that is not one of them.
It made me want to, and I couldn't because it's part of the songs, right? But it made me want to think like, how would I have graded these same songs if I just was able to remove the snare drum altogether, if I was just able to disregard that? And that was one of my thoughts going into it. Like, maybe I'll just pretend it's not there. Maybe I'll do everything I can. And I honestly think I accidentally kind of did that.
Really?
I don't
How?
know that it really would have changed how I felt about the songs. It was just another layer of, I don't know, another grading layer, I guess, in the background. So with some songs more than others, specifically like Frantic and Saint Anger, as you mentioned, the first two tracks, like I feel like it's much more pronounced. Or maybe I just noticed it more versus some of the other tracks.
Okay. I don't know. It was very difficult to do that. I could not separate that. That's my thing. And it's interesting. And I know that if you go searching on YouTube and stuff, people have re-recorded the entire album with normal drum pieces. And I did not go that far to see if I could find those and see if anything was changing for me, because I don't know. That doesn't quite seem.
It's not the assignment, right?
Exactly.
Also, since you mentioned it, I do have to give a shout out to Douglas Yancey Funny for the banging on a trash can reference. A little voice is still calling me to this day. Doug put out one of the bangers of the summer of 95 or whenever the fuck it came
out. We mentioned Invisible Kid, and we mentioned how lyrically a lot of stuff felt like James Hetfield going through therapy, and he had stuff to say here. He's, like I said, this is I mean, if you weren't aware yet by the fifth song, James is clearly working through something here, but it's rough. And he figured out he would want to try and write something with a solid phrasing, and he's trying to jam a coherent and it's almost pop constructed phrasing into this, but he's doing it into a harsh and metal environment, and it doesn't click. It just doesn't work. And then all the pieces surrounding that make it even worse. I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't click. Like, there's a harsh juxtaposition there, but in Frantic, it worked if you take the mindset that, like, hey, we're trying to make this feeling. And this is trying to be, I mean, it's an angry kid lashing out, maybe, but that it doesn't, I don't know. Doesn't click. I don't know how else to describe it.
I mean, we know that in music, in songs, there is a damn near requirement to rhyme at the ends of lines. And I feel like that requirement really hampered a lot of these songs, and perhaps none more so than Invisible Kid, because I feel like I'm James Hetfield going on to rhymezone.com, even though let's pretend it existed, 20 years ago, and just saying, like, I'm going to end the line with this word. Let's see what rhymes with it, which is where you get things like Invisible Kid got a place of his own where he'll never be known. Inward he's grown. Inward he's grown like a toenail. Perhaps not the imagery that you wanted there, James.
I don't think that's, I don't think that's not the, and yeah, like I said, that's hanging way too far on to the that it has to be ABAB, and it doesn't have to be ABAB.
Correct. Yeah, just because it's the most popular rhyming form. I mean, you're Metallica. Like the bar is higher for you in 2001 than it is for probably most bands, or sorry, in 2003 than it is with most bands at that time.
But it's not. That's the thing. Like for James, okay, Hetfield has always been a pretty basic writer, right? And like, don't forget, like we keep mentioning Master of Puppets, but it contains one of the most middle school, like Reason and Season. And we're just like, yeah, but the song itself is so well put together and hits so hard. We'll just ignore the fact that like this is literally middle school level poetry.
That's fair. That's fair. You tend to grade on a curve with things that you have more of a reverence towards. That is a very fair point.
Well, yeah, yes and no, but I think you also tend to grade on a curve when, you know, it's kind of one of those, okay, you got 4 out of the 5 things going here. Yeah. So you still did pretty well. So we'll just kind of
gloss over this one.
Yeah, we'll just push that to the back burner, and no one need to, don't pay attention to the forced rhyming structure there. Listen to the riff. Listen to the power. There's a solo will be coming up soon. Listen to that.
Let's forget about everything else.
Just I would love
the solo.
When you're finally through to track 6, which is My World. And we mentioned this again, but again, I'm just reading because I just kind of wrote off the cuff. And at this point in the record, we're more than half an hour in, and I can clearly say it sounds the same. And then the writing continues. We get, it's my world, suckers. Okay, then. I didn't realize Metallica wanted to write John Cena's rock anthem a year before he debuted, but it is what it is. But here's where I kind of turned, and it was much harder. Like the needle was kind of wavering, and I was kind of talking myself into, okay, well, there's some stuff going on, and there's an idea, and maybe, okay, if it's one thing if there's an idea and I can say I can see an idea, I just don't get it. So I can kind of like, all right, well, I'll give you a little bit more. But then I get to My World, and it falls into an area that Metallica albums aren't supposed to be in, and really don't. Skippable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I labeled it as inoffensive, but in the insulting way. It's the most plain ice milk song on the entire album is what I wrote in my notes. And yeah, it's there. It happened. But it's not even bad enough to consider it as one of the worst songs, which almost works in its detriment.
You're completely right, but I need to go back to make sure my ears heard ice milk, really?
It's an old Simpsons reference, because I've already got the Doug reference, so I might as well tell
I go for this. Okay. That one passed me by. I'm sorry. I wish I could have been passed by track 7.
Perfect segue.
Shoot me again. And again, I read what I wrote as I was listening. Very Alice in Chains vocals in the verses, if you can call them those. And then we get most of the way through, again, a 7-minute song. And then it's like Rick popped up. Slow Mobius hit me with the clock beam. And instead of like doing the rewind and going back to the best part of the song, they just did a bridge and chorus again, and it took another minute and a freaking half.
This was the hardest listen on the album. I'm not saying this was the worst song on the album, but this was the hardest listen because of exactly what you said. It's the least necessary to be as long as it is of any other track on the album. It loses the most for being longer than 2 minutes. I also mentioned that it locked up Metallica's third place finish in their local System of a Down Sound-Alike contest. So they had that going for them.
Yeah. It was interesting that, you know, you go through, and we'll keep referencing some kind of monster, and you get to a point where they're arguing about the lack of solos. And Kirk Hammett is saying, well, the argument from between Lars and Kirk is that Lars coming that the solo isn't what it was before when we've been doing this in the past, and like it means something different. So that's what this is. It's an album of rock for now. And Kirk's point, which I agree and disagree with their point, is that yeah, but that means that this dates this album to here and now in a way that we also haven't been doing. I'm like, kind of yes, but at the same time, and it was the reference to System of a Down, because this song was like, yeah, but this entire track is clearly trying to be what this sound was of rock and metal in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's very slice of time, right?
Yeah, like so the whole like so it doesn't, solo or not, it doesn't matter. The album's already dated to the period because of songs like that.
Yeah, you drove it off the lot and it immediately dropped like $5,000.
I didn't know it was an Alfa Romeo. That's not fair. You didn't drive it off the lot, get 2 blocks, and the album didn't break down.
If there are any Alfa Romeo representatives listening right now, we still appreciate your patronage. Just not your cars.
That's not fair. I'm going. I can't say I've ever driven an Alfa.
No, I have not had the pleasure either. I parked next to one once. It was as close as I got.
I was say I've not driven an Alfa, but I have had to have my car towed from the side of the highway, so I feel like I'm in right there with Alfa owners.
You've had the experience. That's
exactly.
All that
matters. I'm just trying to delay the inevitable before I have to start talking about Sweet Amber. I really am. Oh. In fact, I won't. I'll let you, because all I wrote for Sweet Amber was, it's probably not good. The track that's considered the hidden gem on the record generated precisely nothing for me.
Oh, let's see where to start with Sweet Amber. I have somehow, some way, I have so much to say about this track. So one of the issues that I have with it, and it's actually going to bleed into the next track, it takes 30 seconds for, if you're listening like on stereo headphones, it takes 30 seconds for the music to get off of just being on the left channel and finally be an actual stereo track. If you're listening with one headphone on, which I typically do, you might think that your Spotify is broken. You might think that your computer isn't outputting any kind of sound anymore, and try to fucking like troubleshoot that. And then you realize, no, it's just that the track was doing this for no apparent reason. That's me picking nits. I understand. What's not me picking nits is that James can't fucking decide which key or cadence he wants to sing in throughout this entire track. Like, it feels like he switches it up at the very last second over and over. During the first verse, he says, "Watch your back so you don't stab mine. Get in bed with your own kind." And I'm trying to say it like he did because it sounds so like unsure, kind of like a newborn fawn. And same thing during the chorus where he says, "How sweet are you? How sweet does it get?" It's just very like Weekend karaoke for me in the worst way.
Weekend karaoke. Wow. I would be fearful if someone tried to do this track for karaoke.
Yeah, it wouldn't go well.
No. Right. But as you mentioned, it flowed into that unnamed feeling for you.
It did. It did indeed. Because I feel like it was the left and right channel thing, but just amplified. You start off the song, you have James laying down the rhythm guitar to start, and then Kirk Hammett coming over the top with the riffs that he does. Which fine, I like that as a general concept. What I don't like is that it sounds like two different songs, one in one ear and one in the other ear, because not only do the guitars sound different, Hetfield's is much more crunchy and Hammett's is much more smooth, but they don't sound in sync at all, which is, again, not a gripe of the song, that's a gripe of the production. I also understand that piece, but it's still a part of the overall presentation, and it just didn't, like, it ruined the entire song for me, to be honest.
And weirdly enough, even with essentially two songs running at once, it's still like the third or fourth song in the row that sounded the exact same. Like, there isn't, and I say that as we're about to just change, but for the heart of this record, there isn't much of a change in pace. There isn't much of a change in tempo. It's very samey. And Metallica doesn't do samey that well, or hadn't been doing samey that much. And when things did sound samey, there was a reason for it. But I can't find one. It's just, we're doing it again.
If I guess just to quickly play devil's advocate, like, on myself, not on you. I totally agree with what you're saying, but at least this track to me did have not only decent writing, which I think is the first time I could say that in the entire album, but a really like emotive, profound delivery too. Like this was the first track where, like, obviously knowing what James went through, this is the first track where I felt like I could feel that James was going through something, that there was actual pain behind those words, that there was actual suffering behind those words. And that did elevate it, to be honest. It really did.
And just when you thought we were going to start a run of positivity, Purify.
God, do we have to?
No, honestly, I'm okay with that. Like, it's another track where there's just pieces and parts flying together, and instead of going, this is here's an idea, let's make this, they just took them all and slammed them together. Like, if this was a band that was supposed to just be weird noise, this song would be amazing from them. But this is Metallica. We're supposed to be able to write songs. It's not good. It's just not good.
Yeah, like the writing specifically from The Unnamed Feeling into Purify is like, it was jarring. It was like whiplash. It was so much worse. Like, any of you listeners, if you have kids, or even if you don't have kids and just happen to have a speak and spell nearby, give it a few pulls and just write down the results, and I guarantee you it will be better than Purify. I guarantee it.
Yes, actually. If you have like the poetry magnets for your refrigerator, just take a handful, throw it at the fridge, and whatever sticks in what order you want to go, you'd probably write a better song than Purify.
Oh my gosh. You are not. I wish you were joking. I wish that was a bit, but it's so awful.
And the worst part, it's the shortest song on the album at 5:15. It doesn't feel like it.
Right?
But it's the shortest one.
It's so unfair. Like, I ranked, just to pull back the curtain a bit, I did rank like all of my songs 1 through 5. This one I had as a 1, although if my scale went into negative numbers, this would get a negative number for sure. Easily the worst track on the entire album.
-5 stars.
It's not enough. It's not enough.
No, because we still have the album closer. It is All Within My Hands. It is 8 minutes and 48 seconds, and I had to turn it off after 25. I couldn't do it. I honestly could not do it. It is where the infamous, where the meme, the donk-donk-donk-donk-donk-donk-donk meme comes from.
Yep.
But it doesn't go away when they start into the actual riff. It's still there. It's still going on. It's still burrowing itself into your brain. And it will for the next nearly 9 minutes.
Yeah, they saved not the best for last. They saved the longest for last. So at 8 minutes, 48 seconds, the longest track on the entire album.
And this is where you have to ask, was there really nothing that could be cut from this record?
I mean,
so I know we've complained about the length alone quite a bit, and I had to look this up, and honestly, it's not the longest record of their career. It's right on average with the latter half of their albums, but man, there's something about this that just makes it feel so much longer than it's 75 minutes. And honestly, by the end, the record is exhausting, and not in a good way.
Yeah. It tires you out. And it really does. At the very least, if the last track was like, oh, this is only 4 minutes, this is 3.5 minutes, we can actually get out and get on to whatever we were doing today, instead of All Within My Hands deciding that saying the word kill 38 times was the best possible way to end an album. 38 kills in a row. You're done before the first one, don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. No, fuck yeah. You get it. I get it. We all get it. Thank you.
Yeah. Kudos to you if you got through all 38. Like, you should get like one of those little Xbox achievement noises coming up.
Survive the pain. I just, like, after listening to it again, I don't feel like my feelings on this have changed at all. I just started writing down a list of stuff, things to add, to talk about that were issues, and the drums are still just so hard to get away from.
Yeah.
And it leads in the production overall because it's not good. If there was any sense of cohesion to it, it would be lauded for its experimental harshness. But just overall, the whole thing feels lost.
Yeah.
And we can complain about the length and what the feel and the actual time is different. But then you go to that lack of solos and how you put out an album that features one of the best metal guitarists to ever plug in your band and then give him literally nothing to do. I just don't understand it. And we brought it up earlier, and it's not necessarily fair to lump this in with an actual criticism of the album, but it does help define the image of the album. And it is just some kind of monster. Because after looking at it again like trying to recontextualize, like the movie just confirmed all of our worst fears after hearing the album, that the progenitors of a generation of metal anger and ennui were actually bitchy rich kids. And I'll never be able to shake that scene where they're sitting in the studio bitching because part of the promotion of the record is doing liners for radio stations. And they're complaining that if we don't cut these, they're not going to play our song. Well, radio wasn't touching this one anyway. But if they like, so it's a you scratch my back or I scratch your back and you don't stab mine. I'm like, motherfucker, you have been in the music industry at this point for over 20 years. You understand how album promotion works. I'm so sorry you had to sit there and go, hey, this is James from Metallica. You're listening to our new single, Saint Anger, right here on KROKK. I am so fucking sorry that you had to waste breath to put your work in front of people, which is you just expected it to be out in front of. It's a minor thing, and I have the background in it, and that's why it might just stick with me. But Jesus Christ. If anybody else complained that much about doing what's expected as part of their job, they'd be fired. I kind of wish I hadn't watched the movie, and I didn't have that impression of the guys' people.
It changes things, right? Yeah.
It does. And when the music is not good, as you often find out, the faults in the people are what stands out. Talk to Drake.
I mean, we see it all the time. Everything is great when everything is great, you know?
Yep. If the music is good, all the other bullshit usually falls away. And when you start making good music, that's when reality comes through. I don't know if you want to have anything you want to add on that list or had more stuff to add to that.
No, I think you nailed it. And I'm super happy that you talked about the documentary, because I feel like some version of me did watch it like years and years ago, like when it first came out, but I should have, and I wish I did watch it right before, like alongside doing this re-listen to the album just for that added perspective. But yeah, it's hard to really decouple anything, you know, whether it's the output of some kind of monster, whether it's knowing what James was going through at the time. Like, it's as much as we try to, you know, and I feel like we do a pretty good job, but we are biased individuals, and that is going to play into how we feel about everything, including music. You know, I will say that there were more good songs, more songs that I didn't hate is a better way to put that on this album than I had initially thought. But I absolutely would say that we were not too hard on Saint Anger.
I was going to stole the thunder. I was going to ask, okay, so ultimately were we or were we not? But you are 100% correct. That's not to say that my impression has changed. I was not won over. This is still a bad record. Were we too hard on it? Maybe. But I mean, you're within, like, if you're on a 1 to 10 scale and you decided this song, we were a 3 on it. It doesn't do anything at worst. Maybe it wiggles it up to a 4, if that makes sense. Like, that's not an actual, that's just using that as to illustrate what I'm saying. Like, maybe we're a little less harsh, just a little bit, but it's all still in the red.
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly. That I think our feeling on it has improved a little bit, but not enough to call it even a mediocre album.
No. At the end of the day, for me, it sounds like an album that was cranked out because it needed to get cranked out, and it screams first draft from front to back.
Yeah.
And what does Hemingway say about first drafts? They're always shit.
He was a smart dude. He knew what he was talking about.
He knew a little bit about writing. So that's our first go at Were We Too Hard On? Maybe by the time we do this again, we'll have come up with a better name or not. We'll have to see. But I'm also looking forward to picking on a subject that maybe we'll be able to turn around and actually go, yes, we were too hard on, and it's time to re-examine that. But that is for another episode down the road. However, if anything you've heard of the last, I don't know how long this will end up being, pisses you off, and you want to tell us that we are terrible people whose opinions on music are completely incorrect, and we should feel bad for having those opinions, Zach, how would the good people do that?
God, I don't know that we're ready for those floodgates to open. But I mean, we pledge to be accessible. We're not running away from that. We may run away from that in the near future, but as of right now, at Fairly KickAss on Twitter, TikTok, Threads, and Instagram is where you will find us. Let us know what you thought about this episode. Let us know if you have other potential Were We Too Hard On topics for.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Episodes.
If you have other ideas what we should be doing,
we are always all ears for that or for any other of our episodes or segments or whatever the hell we're going to call them. Always love to get more feedback, more topics. I've actually gotten several from friends of mine, and several of those have went on to be actual episodes. So yeah, keep them coming. fairlykickass@gmail.com. If you'd rather email your correspondence to us, it will be taken in not so strict confidence. We will dox you all over the. I'm kidding. We would never. As long as you don't send us like credit cards and socials and everything, like those are going immediately on the dark web.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like there's no question where that's going. Like, but you knew that before you even sent that.
Yeah, like look who you're dealing with. Come on. fairlykickass.com for your ride-along playlist. Obviously, the ride-along playlist for this is just going to be the album, so I may not even put one up. I probably will just to have it up, but
yeah,
know that you can
put the
find
album
it.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
You know what it is, and if you really want to suffer through that, yeah, that's up to you. That's up to you.
It's up to you. Don't is the operative word, but if you must go through what we went through, then by all means that will be available, and also available for you other episodes of this here Fairly Kick-Ass podcast. You can find us anywhere where you get your podcasts. The newest provider that we have not been on and we will be on very soon is YouTube, YouTube Music, YouTube Audio. By the time you hear this, we will already be live on YouTube. So check us out there if that is your preferred podcast listening method of choice.
Let's go.
Anywhere else, just search for Fairly Kick-Ass and you'll get us.
I probably was supposed to have something charged and ready to go, something snappy like, hey, thanks for listening and we'll see you next time and all this stuff. But all that my brain looked up to my other window and went, Washington State's put up 69 points.
Nice.